I'm Jeff Pimentel. I'm the project manager on the project. Thank you for being here this evening, and we'll go ahead and get started. So a few housekeeping items. If everyone could hold their questions to the end of the presentation, that would be appreciated. There are slide numbers in the bottom right. They're in white. They're a little bit faint, but hopefully you can see them. And if there is a slide you want to reference later on, just mention that. We can definitely go back to that and address your comment or question. We're also, while this meeting, we're not really outwardly looking for public comment, like we're not presenting something that we're asking for comment on. We do realize that you may want to make a comment on something that you see here tonight or just something about the project in general. And so we do have comment cards in the back that you can go ahead and fill in and leave those with our staff here tonight. You can also, if you'd like to take them home and have a little bit more time to write out your comment, they can be mailed. Attention to me, Jeff Pimentel, Caltrans District 1, 1656 Union Street in Eureka. Something I want to mention too, we used to have the projector here that was a little larger. And so if any text is hard to read, especially on the layouts of the alternatives, those are all out in the lobby. So you can see them out there as well. And if there is, you want a copy of this, it'll also be on the website, so you'll be able to reference it as well. But I apologize if it's a little bit harder to read in the back of the room. And then, as I mentioned, the presentation will be uploaded to our public engagement portal, which you can get to by simply going to www.ferndaleaccess.org. Towards the top of that page, there's a link to the public engagement portal, and that's where you will find that, and I'll cover a little bit more about that later and how to navigate that website. We'll start with our non-discrimination policy statement. Caltrans ensures that no person in the state of California is excluded from participation in, denied the benefits of, or otherwise subjected to discrimination in Caltrans programs, policies, procedures, activities, and services on the grounds of race, color, national origin, sex, age, or disability. And for information or guidance on how to file a complaint or obtain more information regarding Title VI, please contact the Title VI branch manager at 916-324-8379. Or there's also this website, dot.ca.gov/program/civil-rights/title/ Roman numeral 6. Our agenda for tonight will cover project background, status, and what's coming next. We'll go through our purpose and need, which we have covered in previous public meetings, but we'll go ahead and recap that, as well as cover all the alternatives that we are considering as part of this phase and that will move into the next phase of the project. And those alternatives that we're going to present tonight are the exact alternatives we presented to you at our last public meeting just a few months back. We'll cover some environmental topics around the project, including the level of environmental document that we're going to be producing, mitigation, permitting agencies that we'll be coordinating with, and whatnot. We'll briefly touch on construction schedule and cost for the various alternatives. All of you also, or hopefully all of you, but probably many of you at a minimum, completed a survey that we had put out at the last public meeting, and so we'd like to share with all of you what your fellow community members, in terms of the results of that and how everyone responded. So we'll cover that, and then we'll end with reminding everyone how to stay engaged and informed as we go into the next phase of this project. So project location, as I'm sure all of us know, I don't want to put you to sleep with this, but it's necessary to always cover this information. We're talking about Fernbridge. The Caltrans bridge number is pound 04-0134. It's in Humboldt County on Route 211, and it's post mile 77.0 to 78.8 represents the project limits. Project background. As you all remember, emergency repairs were made immediately after the December 22 earthquake to restore essential traffic, minimize the extent of damage, and protect the remaining facilities. Once that was complete, and actually in the midst of completing that work, we initiated an improvement project, and we came to you all to announce that initiation of that project to identify solutions that will provide safe, sustainable, and reliable access to Ferndale. The last portion of the emergency project was the installation of the seismic gates. We have done, I believe, most of the underground work to support the installation of these gates. There on the right, you'll see a rendering from each angle or each point of the bridge that'll show approximately what it would look like. We are not expecting a full closure in order to install the seismic gates, which I know is something people were concerned about because that's something we've had to do before for the emergency repairs. We do expect there will be some type of lane closure, but not a full closure. And really what we're waiting on right now is there's been a significant amount of lead time on some of the materials we need to install everything you see above the ground here. And so that's really what's driving the schedule to get this work done. But we are optimistic that it may be complete by late summer or fall of this year. But once driving, you will not miss it once they are installed. In terms of project development, this is also something you've seen in the past. This essentially covers all the different phases of project development for projects within Caltrans. We start in the planning phase with initiating an idea, whether it's, in this case, a bridge that needs some work and needs some repair. And then we immediately move into what's called the project initiation phase, and that's where we've been all these months since we initiated the project. Now that we are complete with the project initiation phase and we've got what's called a project initiation report, that is also going to be available online for all of you to look at. It's going to include all the information that I will share today, but in a lot more detail. And now that we have that, that's essentially the document that we utilize to go to the California Transportation Commission to ask for the money we need to move the project into the next phase. And that next phase is the project approval and environmental document phase. It is one of the longest phases, maybe aside from construction, depending on the magnitude of a project that you have, which this one is a significant magnitude and effort to build. But in terms of the phases that we are not building to the end of the design phase, P&ED is our longest phase. It's where we're writing the environmental document, doing a lot of structural analysis, preliminary engineering, coordinating with the resource agencies, figuring out our mitigation and various other things. So next month, in August of 2025, we are on the agenda to go to the California Transportation Commission hearing to put it to vote for funding for the next phases. So that's, I think, really great news that that's happening. And as you see here, community outreach and engagement goes from beginning of the project to the very end of construction. So that's something like what we're doing here, we will be doing with you all along the development of the project, both in person and through the portal, which is another way for everyone to stay engaged with the project when all of us can't be out here in Ferndale. So a little bit more detail about what is P&ED and what is this next phase that we're going into, project approval and environmental document. We will prepare an environmental document, and I will go into a little bit more the level of environmental document that we will be preparing. It is at a level where we will have what's called a draft environmental document that will go out for a circulation to the public. We'll have a public meeting that will be a part of that, similar to this, and then we will have what's called a final environmental document to mark the end of that phase. But as we take the path to getting there, there are a number of environmental technical studies that we'll need to do, from cultural, biological, Dominic could probably list them all for you a lot better than I can, but his team will go out and essentially do all of those technical studies in this next phase so we can understand what are the project impacts that we will have across the multitude of alternatives that we're looking at. We'll do various preliminary engineering work as well as additional alternatives analysis. Something that we've mentioned in the past is we really don't know how feasible or what the feasibility is to rehabilitate the existing bridge or what it would take to do that. And so that's something that we'll be diving into in this next phase. As I've mentioned, we'll obviously be doing community engagement and keeping you guys informed, and not just informing you and telling you things, but also wanting to receive feedback. So that'll be part of that phase as well. Significant amount of agency coordination. We'll go through a list of all the agencies that we're going to have to coordinate, but the list is long. This project, checks every single box in terms of the agencies that we need to coordinate with. At the end of all of this, essentially what you can put your hands on in terms of the deliverable that will conclude this phase will be a project approval that at the end of it, we will actually be selecting what's called a preferred alternative. It'll be the alternative that will move forward into the design phase that we will ultimately construct, and that's what we will do collectively as a group between Caltrans and the community that wants to be involved in that process. So that's documented in what's called a project report. And along with that, there will be an environmental document, certification, and approval that will go along with that as well. So lots of work ahead of us, and we'll talk a little bit more about timeline for that. You know what, actually, I'm going to back up a slide because I missed that timeline portion. So we plan to vote the funds for the next phase next month in August 2025. Our target date for completing this project approval environmental document phase will be April of 2029. So we're looking at just under 4 years to get there. And then once we've reached that milestone, our target to complete the design phase would be April of 2031. So we're looking at about 2 years to design. I don't have a time frame on construction because depending on the alternative that's selected, that time frame can be changes not significantly, but there is a distinction between the different alternatives that we'll talk about soon. Project purpose. Every single project within our department has a very specific purpose and need. That purpose and need is really what puts the sideboards on how we develop a project, what's included in the project, and what's our objective and what we're trying to achieve. The purpose of this project is to restore reliable access to and from the city of Ferndale for all roadway users, which includes providing a structurally resilient bridge that meets current bridge design standards, reducing risk of damage from future events. The project need. Fernbridge provides the most direct route to and from the city of Ferndale, and on December 20th of 2022, a 6.4 magnitude earthquake with an epicenter approximately 10 miles southwest of Ferndale damaged the road surface and bridge approaches. Monitoring sensors installed on the bridge indicated a permanent change in vertical pier alignment and increases in crack width on piers 2, 3, 4, and 5. Emergency repairs were made immediately after the earthquake to restore essential traffic, minimize the extent of damage, and protect the remaining facilities. A permanent solution is needed for the bridge to be more resilient and reduce the risk of damage from future events. So alternatives. In terms of rehabilitation, and I mentioned this earlier in terms of the project approval and environmental document phase and going into this alternatives analysis as well as structural analysis that Grant's group is going to be very busy with here soon. We still don't really know what the feasibility is of rehabilitating the bridge. We understand the community is very attached and loves that bridge, its historic nature, what it looks like, all of it. But we just don't know if it's possible, and if it's possible, what that will take. So that's something we'll dive into. Those alternatives are still very much part of the project. We just want to qualify that we don't know if that's possible. But we plan to dig into that and be able to answer that in this next phase. And that is very common going into this phase, a project like this, not knowing that yet. So alternatives 1 and 2, and I apologize, we had the screen before and I expected that you would be able to read all of this. I'm gonna read through them, and it may be difficult in the back to read that. These are the exact displays that are in the lobby there, so hopefully by me going through them, you'll understand them, and then we can always go back there and chat about layouts you'd like to after the meeting. So alternatives 1 and 2 are very similar, just a distinction between the two. They essentially would look at rehabilitating existing Fernbridge for all traffic. Alternative 1 would rehabilitate it at its existing width. So essentially the width you see out there today would be the width you have post-project. No shoulders, lane widths I think are 11 feet 4 inches. And then alternative 2 would rehabilitate the bridge, but it would widen the bridge deck to achieve standard lane widths and shoulder widths, which I believe would be 12-foot lanes and 8-foot shoulders. This shows you all of these lines. We are not planning to build 4 bridges. We're just going to build 1. But this shows you the various steps we would take to achieving the end result. At the end of going through all of these alternatives, I will show you a sequenced, it's not really an animation, but I will show you individually the steps, and I think it'll help you better understand what's going on here. But just starting here, step 1, which is there, is to construct an upstream trestle. Trestles, when you hear me reference those, are essentially just a construction work surface that all the construction equipment would be working from to do whatever operation they're doing. So that's temporary. Second, in this case, we would need a temporary detour bridge, so that's in red. And we would construct the temporary detour bridge next. And then step 3, we would construct a downstream trestle to be able to perform work from. And then step 4, in yellow, we would do the rehabilitation work on the existing bridge. Step 5, which signified here on this, we would remove the downstream trestle. And then step 6, we would remove the temporary detour bridge in red. And then the last stage of construction, stage 7, we would reduce that upstream trestle. It'll make, I think, if everyone's eyes roll in the back of their heads, when I get to the sequence, it's going to make a lot more sense. So alternatives 3 and 4, very similar, just one distinction between them, which I'll get to here. But essentially, they construct a new permanent bridge, which you see here in green, and they will rehabilitate the existing Fernbridge, which is shown in yellow for non-motorized users. Non-motorized users would be pedestrians, cyclists. First stage here would be to construct this upstream trestle, and then stage 2, we would construct the new bridge. And then stage 3, we would construct a downstream trestle. And then stage 4, we would do the rehabilitation work utilizing those 2 trestles. And then stage 5, we would remove both trestles. And you would be left in green, a new bridge for motorized traffic, and then yellow would be utilized for pedestrians and cyclists. And something I wanted to mention before I didn't mention is that the alignments, especially the replacement, no decision has been made whatsoever on the location of a new bridge or the location of a temporary bridge. So it's really conceptual at this point. That's not even a conversation we've had with all of you in the community yet. But adjacent to the bridge is a logical point to put it, but we haven't had those discussions, and those discussions will be occurring at this next phase of the project. And we'll include your input and involvement in that. All right, alternative 5. This one would construct a new bridge that you see in green, and it would demolish and remove existing Fernbridge. So stage 1 would be to construct the trestle in blue. Stage 2, to construct the new bridge in green. Stage 3, we would remove Fernbridge, shown in yellow. And then stage 4, we would remove the temporary trestle. Alternative 6 would construct a new permanent bridge and leave Fernbridge in some sort of a monument state. And defining what that looks like it has not been defined. It could be leaving the bridge as it stands. It could be leaving just the piers as something that the community could see as a historical portion of the bridge, but that hasn't been defined. There's a lot of conversations that also would need to take place about that. Also from a safety perspective, with people recreating under the bridge, and you have a bridge that's being left, maybe not maintained as a historic landmark. So more conversations need to take place about with that. But with this one, stage 1 would be to construct the temporary trestle in blue, stage 2, construct the new bridge in green, and then stage 3, remove the trestle. So you'd be left with some portion of the existing bridge as a historical landmark and the new bridge in green. This alternative, in terms of the funding that we are going for to the California Transportation Commission, this is the alternative that we are seeking the money for. Not because this alternative is one that the department favors, it's actually the least costly alternative and that we feel like it's a good starting point, but in no way does the department going for the money that matches the estimate for this alternative mean that we're locked in any way more so to this alternative than any other. So we have methods and ways to deal with change management when it comes to cost changes and whatnot. But this is the alternative. When you read the project initiation report, this is the alternative that matches with the funding request we're making next month. And then the last alternative, alternative 7, will remove existing Fernbridge and construct a new permanent bridge on its existing alignment. So the new bridge would be where Fernbridge is today. Stage 1, construct the new trestle, or construct the work trestle in blue. Stage 2, construct the temporary bridge in red. Stage 3, we would then remove the existing Fernbridge structure. Stage 4, we'd build a new one in its place. And then stage 5, we would remove the temporary detour bridge in red. And stage 6, we would remove the temporary trestle. Okay, lane widths. I mentioned this when I was going through the alternatives, but here's just a table to show you. Alternative 1, where we are proposing to rehabilitate the existing bridge at its existing width with no widening, would be left with 0 shoulders, as essentially you have out there today, and then lane widths of 11 feet 4 inches, and no separated pedestrian path. Alternatives 2 through 7, for the bridge that you will be driving on, and I want to say that because in 2 of the alternatives, we are proposing to convert the existing Fernbridge to a pedestrian and cyclist bridge. But this references lane widths for vehicles. So alternatives 2 through 7, you would be left with an 8-foot shoulder and 12-foot travel lanes. And then we're also proposing a separated pedestrian path, cyclist path that would be 6 feet in width. That would actually be separated by a physical barrier of some kind that would be vehicle resistant. It wouldn't just be a stripe on the road. There would actually be a physical barrier there. Okay, now the construction staging example, and I think this will make a little bit more sense. So this is mimicking or modeling what a construction sequence would look like for alternatives 1 or 2. So existing Fernbridge there in the middle of your screen. First stage, we would construct the upstream trestle. Stage 2, we would construct the temporary detour bridge. Stage 3, we would construct the downstream trestle. In stage 4, we would do the actual rehabilitation work to the existing structure, Fernbridge. And then stage 5, we would remove the downstream trestle. Stage 6, we would remove the temporary detour bridge. And then stage 7, we'd remove the upstream trestle. So I don't know if my explanation earlier matched that or not, but I know it helps me visualize it seeing this. Okay, so now moving on to environmental topics surrounding the project. We are proposing to have an environmental impact report under the California Environmental Quality Act, CEQA, and then under NEPA, the National Environmental Policy Act, we will have what's called an environmental assessment. In terms of impacts and mitigation, we don't really have it. We have done estimates, which you can find in our project initiation report with regards to impacts across all the alternatives in terms of our estimates on what those impacts would be. But those estimates are very preliminary. They're based off a lot of assumptions. You know, staff has not been able to go out in the field on the ground. I mean, they have, but not to the level that we really need to really be able to quantify our impacts. And we don't really understand enough yet about the alternatives to be able to also really understand the impacts of each of the alternatives. But that is something, this next phase is essentially what it's meant for. So I'm not going to be sharing numbers because they don't really mean a whole lot at this point. But again, those estimates are in that report, which will be online. You can access that. But just to give you a little bit of a background on how we address impacts and mitigation on our projects such as this one, our first preference is to avoid any impacts that we can. But oftentimes, especially a project like this, we're not able to do that. So then we look at what minimization measures can we employ to minimize those impacts that we must have. At the end of that, we have a certain amount of impacts that each alternative will have. And so our preference is to find mitigation that we can perform to mitigate those impacts on site within the project limits where they have the greatest impact for the habitat and the resources that we are impacting there at the site. But oftentimes there's not enough space and room and the types of mitigation that we need to be able to do it all on site within the project limits. So at that point, then we need to look at an off-site location to do perform mitigation for the remaining impacts that can't be mitigated on site. So this is essentially the hierarchy of how we will be addressing impacts and mitigation on the project. The next phase will be understanding a lot more about that. We plan to bring you more information. In terms of the various agencies we'll be dealing with on this project, here's a list of them. There could be some others as well, but this is really probably the heavy hitters that we'll be dealing with. I don't think I would probably really need to list them all. Again, this will be, you can find this online, or if you want me to come back to this, I can. In terms of construction schedule, there is kind of a wide range of years of construction depending on the alternative. We've tried to kind of group them because, again, a lot of the information we're producing right now is based on assumptions because we don't have a lot of we have a lot of knowns, but there's a lot of things we don't know yet because we haven't been able to dive into those yet, which we will in this next phase. So that's why you'll see a range, and the range will also be reflected on some of the costs as well. No doubt, I do expect that the number of years of construction as we get into the project more, I believe those will shift some. And the costs will shift. That always happens as we learn more about the project and we do more of our engineering analysis, understand our impacts. These things will adjust. But based on the information we have today, this is our best estimate. So alternatives 1 through 4, we're estimating approximately 9 to 10 years of construction, which even as an engineer that works in the department, I see that number and it's alarming to me. So I can only imagine for those of you not working in the department how alarming that may seem. When you're adding a work trestle on both sides, you have a temporary detour bridge, you're doing rehabilitation work on the existing bridge or building a new bridge in its place, you almost have 4 or 5 projects in one to do all of that work because it's a big effort just to go build a temporary work trestle. That's building a bridge. So those alternatives require a lot of those. They require 2 trestles. Alternatives 5 and 7, a little bit less, 6 to 9 years. And then alternative 6, which is the alternative that we are seeking the funding for as a first step, has the shortest amount of years of construction at approximately 4. In terms of capital cost, alternative 6, that's the alternative new bridge, leaving some portion of the existing bridge as a monument, historical landmark of some kind. Again, we haven't really defined what that looks like yet, but the construction is estimated to be approximately right around 100. I put 181 million because that's exactly what we're asking for. Everything else is rounded, but I felt like it wouldn't be right to not say exactly what we're asking for. So alternative 6, that is our ask, 181 million and some change, and 33 million in capital right-of-way dollars. Right-of-way will cover acquisition of land that we may need, temporary construction easements, mitigation is typically folded into a large portion of our right-of-way costs, and then construction capital. That is the cost to actually build the project. None of these costs represent the staff time and the design work and the analysis that the department will go through to actually develop the project. This is simply the capital dollars to construct, purchase right-of-way, perform mitigation, pay for our permits. So now going on to the other alternatives, 1 through 4 and 7, they have a range of about $230 million to $310 million for construction and $38 to $45 million for right-of-way capital. And alternative 5 at approximately $200 million and about $40 million in right-of-way capital costs. And again, I do expect these to change as we get into the next phase and we start developing the project further than where it's at now. In terms of the public survey results, so we had quite a long list of questions that we asked everyone, but these 3 questions we felt were pretty representative of just the nature of what the community was interested in terms of rehab versus replacement, and looking at the various alternatives that we had presented to all of you, which we worked with all of you to develop those alternatives. So question 1 was, which of the 7 alternatives do you prefer? 45% of people preferred alternatives 1 or 2, which is rehabilitate Fernbridge. 14%, I'm having a hard time with the color here. Okay. 41% preferred alternatives 3, 4, or 6, which was a new bridge and keep Fernbridge. And that would be keep Fernbridge with alternatives 3 and 4 for pedestrians and bikes, and alternative 6 was the monument. And then only 14% preferred alternative 5 or 7, which was a new bridge and demolishing Fernbridge. Question 2 was, if rehabilitation of the existing bridge was your preferred alternative but deemed not feasible, then which alternative would you prefer? So 64% of people said alternative 6, new bridge, and then keep Fernbridge, and that's the monument alternative. And 36% of people said they would prefer alternatives 5 or 7, which is new bridge and demolish Fernbridge. And then the last question was, which is your least preferred alternative? 29% of people said alternatives 1 or 2, which is rehabilitate, was their least preferred. And 18% said alternatives 3, 4, or 6, which is new bridge and keep Fernbridge, as their least preferred. And then 53% of people said least preferred was new bridge and demolishing Fernbridge. So I think from all of this, we can tell the community is very interested in trying to keep the bridge. It's something that we're going to be looking into. But this helps us just get a pulse on what the community is thinking with regards to the various alternatives. And I'm sure we will have more surveys in the future. Show of hands, who completed the survey that we put out? Okay. Maybe in the Q&A, if you guys have any feedback for us on how we might be able to do a survey in the future, any tweaks you would like to see or something we could do better, that would be helpful for us. And then 2 other things on here. We asked, how frequently do you travel to and from Ferndale via Fernbridge? 63% of people said daily, 26% a few times per week, and only 12% a few times per month. And that was out of 86 respondents on that question. And then lastly, the survey also asked all of you to rank various design criteria priorities. There were 10 of them, 0 being least important, 10 being most important. And the top concerns or priorities that came out of that were rated a 10 by average from people were historical preservation at 51% of respondents, use of taxpayer money, 53%, and seismic and flood was 82%. All right, so now on to just staying engaged and informed. How do you get access to this? We're recording this meeting. I encourage you to share it with those members of the community or anyone you think might be interested that wasn't here. Or if you want to look at it again, But go to ferndaleaccess.org. On the top of that page, there's the Caltrans engagement portal link. You'll find that. That'll take you to a page that looks like this one here on the left. And then we have this tab here. You'll notice there's a documents link at the top. That will then take you to this page. And all the documents in the past, summaries of our previous public meetings, I believe previous presentation and slides, as well as the project initiation report is that first file you'll see right up there. You can download that, very easy to access. And if you need to get a hold of me, my contact information is on there. Miles, our public information officer, bug him first. No, I'm just kidding. But anyway, our information's on there if you need to reach us. More than happy to have any conversations anyone wants to have.